Athletes, welcome back. We're changing it up on you a little bit, and we are starting a how-to series to answer questions or just give you some points of performance on movements that you may have questions about. So we got your back. We want you guys to give us feedback on movements you would like to see and questions that you have on particular movements. Athletes, we've got running efficiency tips for you today. So we're gonna go over some variations of some things that you can do to hopefully make running more enjoyable if it's something that you don't necessarily look forward to. And if you already like it, maybe this will make you a little bit better. So we are joined by Seth once again. Now we're gonna keep it in tight here. I'm not gonna have Seth necessarily go on a run. We're gonna do that afterwards. He's got a 5K he doesn't know about. But for right now, we're just gonna be working on our mechanics that we're gonna be doing. And I will give you a disclaimer. I am not the expert foremost on pose running, but that is what we're gonna talk about today. So if you are interested in finding out more about this, you can look up pose, which is P-O-S-E on Google and find some good information on this. But the whole concept of pose running is that rather than overstriding and pushing off of our back leg, which often leads to shin splints and your calves blowing up in general, we're thinking about pulling our leg and getting into a pose position of a figure four. So what's gonna happen is that with Seth, I'm gonna have him turn that way for me. And then I'm gonna have him make a figure four with his foot just like this. So we wanna think about our foot coming forward. So bring it forward for me right there. And there's that number 4, right? Bring me back that heel right here. That's the position that we hit for our figure four position. Now put that foot down and bring the other foot into the same position, just like that. So when we're running, what we're thinking about doing is the lean that we give ourselves. I'm gonna push you forward. I want you to put that other foot down and bring the other foot up and switch. What we're doing is we're passing through our pose position. So step it back for me, Seth. So I'm gonna have Seth watch me as I go through this. And what we're thinking about doing is that when we're running, we wanna think about having not a tightrope, but if you saw your feet on the beach in the sand, we're looking at a single line of footprints versus the side-to-side run like this, which is how I tend to run when I get out of breath. It's like the rhino in the end of Jumanji that's like catching up to everything else. The Robin Williams version is the only real version, by the way. So when we're going through, our pose position is here. As I'm trying to move forward, I switch my position, and I'm thinking about pulling my foot versus pushing off on my back leg. So what I'm gonna have Seth do is he's gonna get into that figure four position, and then he's gonna lean slightly and then switch feet, and then switch feet, and then switch feet, and relax. When we're running, we're thinking about what our foot is doing on the way up, and then we allow it to fall under our body. If you think it's gonna make you run faster by extending your leg out in front of you, what you're doing is, that's like going down the street in your car and tapping the brakes every couple of feet because you are heel striking at that point, and that leads to a whole host of other problems, including shin splints, which a lot of people deal with. Now, if you have access to an air runner or a curved treadmill, you'll find that starts to naturally get you to do pose running, which is why it feels easier to run on the runner than it does outside. With our upper body, when we're going through our running, we want to think about keeping our gaze on the horizon. And Seth can take his hands, and what we're gonna do is that we're gonna clasp our fingers like this. We're gonna point our fingers straight ahead, and we wanna pick a target that's across the room or across wherever we're at. And as we start to go through that run, you can practice this at home, we don't want those hands to bounce up and down. We're looking at trying to stabilize ourselves. So if Seth starts to take a jog across the room, he wants to try to keep those, and that's the best jog I've ever seen, he wants to try to keep those hands stable. If we have a lot of bounce, this is telling us that we have unnecessary motion up and down, which again is gonna blow your calves up because you're basically doing a little single under or double under every time you take a step. And you're gonna find that if you tend to get side stitches, that may also affect it, especially if you've had too much water or taken in too many liquids. Now, speaking of side stitches, that's what we're gonna talk about is with our breathing. So with our breathing, you can choose how you wanna pace yourself out here, but if you ever follow along with the Henshaw work where he talks about his aerobic capacity breathing, he'll talk about taking a breath every so many steps. And if you find the place for you, if it's every third step that you take your breath, every fourth step you take your breath, you'll know how to pace your run. Because if we're taking a breath every step, that means that we are out of breath and we are about to stop running very quickly. So think about the number of steps you're taking in comparison to when you're taking your breath. And lastly, if you are running and you have that side stitch, what we can focus on doing is trying to exhale on the opposite side. So if I've got my side stitch here, I'm not gonna breathe out when my left foot plants because that's gonna make it worse. If I have to keep running, what I'm gonna do is the side stitch is on this side. When this foot plants, that's where I'm gonna breathe out because that's where that compression will happen rather than the other side. So again, I've given you a lot to think about. Seth has done a great job because we haven't gone over figure 4 pose position in depth, but he picks it up very quickly. And just like Buzz Lightyear says, falling in style, that's really all that running is that if you wanna go faster, you are going to lean forward more and you are gonna pull that foot up higher. A figure 4 position or a pose position for a jog or a slow run is gonna be maybe this high. If I'm into a sprint, I have a much higher pull of that foot, and that's gonna help me cycle and lean forward so that I can place that foot underneath me. Again, avoid overstriding and pushing off that back foot, and avoid overstriding in the front and putting on those air brakes and hitting on your heels every time. Athletes, we're back with that bonus tip once again. It's like finding the prize in the bottom of your cereal because again, we're not gonna give you partial instruction. We wanna make sure that we hit everything. So with our running, the one thing that we do want to brief you on is going to be how your foot is actually striking the ground. So when we're running, a lot of times you'll see two types of runners. You'll see people that overstride and they heel strike, which we talked about. That's what's going to lead to shin splints because you're actually pulling that toe up so far. It's like you're doing a toe lift every single time you take a step and it blows up that anterior tib. The other type of runner that you'll see will be people that look like they're running, and when I say this, it's gonna make sense. They almost look like a deer when they're running because they're prancing and they're staying on their toes. This causes you to stay in that permanently calf flexed position, like you're doing a never-ending calf raise, and we wanna try to avoid that as well because our lower body should be relaxed. We've got it engaged, but we don't wanna do too much. So if you've ever seen Forgetting Sarah Marshall, where he's trying to learn how to surf, and he says, do less, that's what I want you to do. You gotta do less so we can catch those big waves. So when we're running, we wanna think about pulling our foot, and then when we place that foot, we have a mid-foot strike, and then we roll off onto our toes. If you guys are overstriding, you're gonna feel yourself hitting on your heel, and then if you are staying in that position of trying to stay bouncy and you're giving me too much up and down and not enough go, we need to think about pulling that foot and putting it onto the floor so that we're getting a mid-foot strike and then rolling off onto your toes. That will set you up for success so that you can cycle on those runs and feel comfortable and feel confident while doing so. This has been your extra pro tip. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. If you apply these tips to your running form, I promise you it is going to make it at least a little bit more enjoyable so you can get out there and show your stuff. So thank you to Seth for joining us. And as always, be good, be kind, and join us again for another great day of fitness.